And I've just noticed my chair's sunk a lot more than George's, so that's a telling thing. I feel better now. That's good. But that was a Medibank joke. You might wonder why I'm here. George, obviously Tricia and I and the family, we had the privilege of being pastors down on the Mornington Peninsula of Victoria. And I can still remember, I'd heard about this George Savvides bloke as sort of one of the leading Christian businessmen, and we were right in the middle of a building campaign, and I can remember thinking, gee, it'd be handy if a few Georges walked through the doors of our building, and one day George did walk through the door of our building. But it started an interesting journey. We were right in the process of working out how do we shepherd people, not just on Sunday, but in their everyday lives as they're trying to live out their faith in their jobs, schools, etc. And I can remember encouraging the other pastors, look, we're going to get on a train and every now and then we're going to go into Collins Street. We're going to just meet with these people and encourage them. In the process of that, I got to know George and realised his contribution to the kingdom went way beyond just, running something or giving to something on a Sunday. He had an incredible vision that God had put on his heart for the health sector. You'll hear about that. And they became very good friends. George went on to chair the board of our church, and his lovely wife, Vivian, and George were really like de facto grandparents to our kids down there when we were away from family. And it was great last night, mate, just reconnecting, and we turned the TV off and pulled out the dictionary and played that game Dictionary. Who's remember that? I haven't played that for years. I got absolutely flogged, but it was a lot of fun. So great to have you with us, George. And and mate, just look, the Medibank Story is an incredible one. George took it over when Medibank was hemorrhaging money and had a turnover around 800 million, which sounds like a lot. And he left in March with a turnover of 8 billion. And a very profitable organisation. And you'll soon hear that George's identity in Christ is not coupled to his assignment. But behind that success, which just sounds out of world to me and to us, I'm sure, are some basic kingdom principles and a real conviction about connecting his Sunday and his Monday. George, can you just tell us a bit of your journey, mate? The Medibank Story and what inspired and brought conviction to you.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. I think the first thing that... Oh, by the way, that audio visual is awesome. It's really great. I think it just captures a big part of the whole story about what we're about and a more important story about going forward, because those that we meet in our everyday are more and more less likely to engage the church in the future because of the trending that's occurring and the harshness of the media towards the church, a whole lot of other stuff that's happening in society. So how much more important to bridge our Sunday and Monday, to be the flavour of Christ in the world, to be that salt that gives flavour to life, to be that light that displaces darkness, whether that's darkness of a lack of relationship or darkness around melancholy or struggle or futility. The people of God come into the world as a reign of God, ambassadors, the image bearers of Christ in the way that we live. In the Medibank assignment, straying away from the question, sorry about that, Duncan.
That doesn't surprise me, mate.
Yeah, I know. I keep going, I went back to have a look at some old notes, and Proverbs 15:33, humility comes before honour. Humility comes before honour. And, that's a good frame for us to always remember. And I tell you, even in the largest corporations in Australia, that proverb is a power play in leadership. If you can somehow displace your own agenda, your own desire for success and popularity and success, to set that aside, that gravitational influence around my own, ambition, and make yourself available to what God is doing in the place where you work and how he wants you as an assignment maker to take that sort of mess in the garden that occurred in those early chapters of Genesis to build that new city in Revelation, which is out there in the Monday world. It's the world that needs a health system that's affordable and accessible, that needs a justice system that looks after the poorest people and the most disadvantaged people, an economy that reaches out to everyone so that there is shelter and food, sort of goes into the World Vision sort of journey that I'm in. And that's what we're here for. To bring the reign of God and all of the beauty that brings to a harsh world that often has people in difficult spaces, and make the love of God known to everyone in the world, and to actually look across to the person in our work environment, in our community, outside of our church setting, And despite the fact that they may be doing the wrong stuff, wrong kind of relationships, maybe self-abuse, maybe other forms of medication, to know that, to look at them in a way that God loves that person. And his love is waiting to be expressed to them through us. And that's a Henry Newham sort of quote in Henry's book, but to look at others around us and not to be judgmental, even if their behaviour makes it appropriate for us to sort of get fired up and be judgmental. But to actually know that actually God wants that person to come back home like that prodigal son. You could easily be judgmental of the prodigal boy when he's sort of spraying his dad's money, the inheritance, and living the wrong kind of life. But it's not judgment that the boy needed. It was that unconditional love of the father, as the father waits for that boy to come home. He runs out to grab him, embarrasses himself, the father, by running, lifting up his sort of cloak. You don't do that in early century Palestine. But it doesn't matter, because the father's not about himself, he's about the love that he has for his children. And he wants us to be image bearers of that love in the world, and this world desperately needs it. My sort of little quotes about this are in the area of call, the sense of call in our lives, in our work. A couple of quotes from Mother Teresa I always go back to. She says in a prayer, pray for me that I hold on to the hand of Jesus while I'm serving the poor. Now get that. Her mission is the poor, but her call comes from the caller, which is Jesus. And we often talk about call, but behind call is a caller. And your mission only really gets its full potential in your Sunday, Monday assignment when you hang on to the caller. And she knew that. She knew that despite her incredible ministry in the slums of Calcutta, the power in that ministry was not her effectiveness in her work, but holding on to the hand of the one that called her. And then the second piece that she writes, which is our Sunday, Monday sort of quote that I like, is she says, just look at yourself in this way. I'm just a pencil in the hand of a writing God, writing a love letter to the world. You might have heard that before. And so that's how we should sort of see ourselves, that we are image bearers. We're that letter that God is writing to a world in the way we live our lives. And that can be in a large corporation in Collins Street or George Street or any part of the New York environment, in the way that we live that out in terms of character and our leadership, where we display self-agenda and submit ourselves to the mission that God's called us to do in that place.
George, can you just share a couple of times? I mean, I know there were some incredible times. There were also some pretty dark times during your season at Medibank. Just share a couple of times when you were that pencil in the hand of a loving God. How did you express that love? Yeah. Just maybe share some stories, mate, of your Medibank experience.
So I knew I was called to the role because somebody tapped me on the shoulder physically. It was at a board meeting, and it's 2001, at the end of the year, September, and those planes hit New York Towers. Half of the company's profits come from investments in share markets, and it was overly exposed, very poorly set to share markets. So when those markets collapsed, Medibank's profit just dissolved. And the other half of its profit comes from the product it sells, and foolishly, the previous administration had got that setting wrong. So it was the third board meeting I was on, and at the time there, I started 3 months earlier as a board member, and the board had concluded that the management had to be turned over because the place was in a mess. It was about to breach its capital adequacy, which meant that the administrator would have to come in and run Australia's largest health fund to try to make it pay out its bills. Very embarrassing because the owner's the federal government. So you can imagine the shareholder minister, which was Kay Patterson, the health minister, and Nick Minchin was the finance minister. There was a lot of stress by these two ministers who were accountable for the largest health fund in the country. So in those moments, the chairman tapped me on the shoulder and said, you've been a CEO before, you've just come from an assignment, why don't you just run this for 6 weeks? And while we start recruiting for a new CEO, and that was 14 years ago. and they sort of renewed that 6-week contract a few times. But when Alan tapped me on the shoulder, the chairman, it wasn't Alan, it was something else. I just knew what's going on here. And so I knew there was something happening. Sitting in Kay Patterson's office and just telling her what we had to do. Kay's a follower of Christ. And in that conversation, the minister said, "Look, I trust you." And that was really important. There was a sense that it was more than just persuasion and, managerial talk. There was
This is the Federal Health Minister?
Yeah, Kay Patterson. And so she bought into committing herself to be supportive and basically empowering me to go and do the changes. And the changes basically came through our staff, and I invited them to contribute to fixing the company that they loved and that they were very concerned about might be coming to an end. And the staff were just amazing. But we just bypassed the pyramid of power and engaged the ground crew, and they contributed hundreds and hundreds of better ways to run the business, and out of that came a turnaround. And I guess the most special moment for me was, and I shared this on, is it Friday night? You've been working me pretty hard, Duncan, up in Toowoomba. But the one I'll never forget was when we were doing some staff briefings around the country, and I was in Erskine Street in Sydney, and our New South Wales Claims Centre, and I was up there talking to staff, a bit of a town hall meeting, just updating them and inviting them to really help fix their company. We couldn't afford consultants, so we needed their help. And I told them that I really believed, because my background in engineering, that you engage the whole process. So I said, I think you know where the company doesn't do its job properly. You know the services and processes that are broken. So I'm going to trust you to give us those ideas, and we'll work through them in a quality management approach. And so we set people up into teams, a bit like how Nehemiah set people up in the tribes to restore the wall. He sort of gave that kind of, we're here on a mission, we want to restore, and everyone had a role to play, and everyone was valued, even though they didn't always get along, those tribes. But you just sort of sorted it out and give everyone different kinds of areas to work on. After the presentation, I was having a cup of tea with the staff, and a couple of women from the Chatswood store in our retail branch came over, and I sort of said hi, and one of the women burst into tears. And I thought, oh gee, I said something wrong. I was trying to work out what did I say that would make her cry. And she sort of restored herself a little bit, and I said, are you okay? Was I rude? Did I say something wrong in the presentation? She said, no. She says, I've been working here for 20 years. You're the first CEO that's ever invited me to come and listen to the CEO. And you said that we were valuable, and you valued our contribution. And she got emotional. She cried. And when you go back to the sort of leadership assignments that we've been asked to live out in our Sunday, Monday world, we're here to unlock the talent that God has in everyone, so that talent can contribute to a restoring, regenerating life in our communities around us. And that kingdom, that reign of God invites everyone who's loved by God, and that is everyone, to make a place in the world and to be able to acknowledge and recognise gifts. So, the first the last, and the last the first in the economy of God. It's all the other way around, right? And when you play that to that song in your leadership, you unlock an incredible talent in the community around you. And in your own sort of church community here, you're already expressing that. It's obvious that everyone has a role to play in making the reign of God something that people experience through your community of faith.
George, people, we talk about exercising our faith in the marketplace, whether that be school, university, work, home, neighbourhood. And I guess that the temptation is to think, I've got to get on the corner and preach. Have I got to invite them to something? And sometimes inviting's appropriate, but really it is those simple things. And for you, purpose has been a big piece in that, hasn't it?
Yeah, so the sort of framework of leadership that I've sort of reflected from the scriptures is one that starts with trust. start with trust. So if you don't have that, your leadership's not going to go anywhere, right? So how you get trust is to, engage the team, probably be less of a captain, more of a coach, less of a brilliant musician, more a conductor of brilliant, talented people. And then you start to explore through trust what we could become, what is our potential, and certainly in the organisations I've led, that's always been the conversation. What is it that we were really born to be? At Medibank, we discovered that we weren't meant to be an insurance company, we were meant to be a health company, so that we could be a great insurance company, if you get what I mean. Because to be health, you had to understand what you're actually insuring. So we actually changed the company to a health company in that 14 years. So in organisations where you start with trust, the followership comes because you've found something that you want to become, the purpose, the mission. And if you can, in a Christian context, displace the gravitational field of self-absorption, which is what I use on Monday to describe sin on Sunday, right? Gravitational field of self-absorption, it's all about me, that kind of stuff. If you can displace that in a team dynamic and have the team really work on mission and be supportive of each other, then you've really got a moving train. You've got something special happening. And so it's important that those componentries, trust and followership, purpose and mission. And when people are signed on to a purpose in their lives, that their work is more than just a job, it's actually a vocation. When work has meaning and purpose, it becomes vocation. It's a bit like Eric Liddell in that lovely old movie, you have to be as old as me to remember it, Chariots of Fire, about that Scottish runner. And he throws back his head and he runs on that back straight. He says, when I run, I feel his pleasure. He's just singing with God. But he's doing his job, he's a runner. But he's in some other sort of altitude. He's just singing with the angels as he... So if you can find that sense of purpose in your own vocation, and look, it doesn't have to be the virtuous purpose of the company itself. It could be that the people that you work with have decided to do something good in the community as a result of just being a team together, as part of being workmates. If the job can't be humane, the company, and not all companies can be, we just got to give them a concession there. You can still make it humane by the way you and your team do something special together. And certainly as a church, you're doing that with your mission support work, and you're supporting people in mission. It's not just about what happens here, it's about what's happening out there. Again, that's a lovely example of understanding what your purpose is and in supporting others.
So George, obviously, you've been in senior leadership roles now for decades, where you're the one who's casting the vision. People are looking for you to provide the direction, and you have the ability to sort of shape a culture. But for a lot of us in our jobs, we're more followers than leaders. We're not vision casters. We're called to follow vision. And for us, in the middle of this Vision Builders series, we're being asked to sign on to a vision. Effectively, we're being asked to be good followers, and different ones of us are engaged at different levels. So what suggestions do you as a leader have to us as who really spend most of our time following? What does it mean to be a good follower?
Well, like the leader as well, followers and leaders, it's the Mother Teresa holding onto the hand that the one that's called us. Because the followers are in that sense of call as well. We're not following the leader of, it's not George at Medibank, right? It's not Carl. It's not you in the work that you do. It's really about why we are here and keeping ourselves centered on the caller who gave us the call. And that call for some of us will be to follow, to play the piccolo or the tuba or the harp. For others it might be to be the conductor who unlocks that lovely talent. I was saying yesterday, I think, when I did a program in Oxford, they were stereotyping a new way of thinking about leader, which was conductor, and they made me conduct a choir as part of my training in that week. Look, I'm the less music... I don't do music. It was lovely. The music of it was great this morning, but, I can't sing for... if I had to put the food on the table from singing, I'd be a very hungry person, right? So I was trying to practice how to conduct a choir. And the song they gave me to conduct was a 200-year-old German hymn, and it was in German. So I can't read the music. I don't know how the rhythm goes. I don't understand the words. I had 30 graduates from music at Oxford in front of me ready to sing, and I had to move my arms. But you know, Peter, the facilitator, who's a famous Danish conductor, poked me and said, "What's your problem?" And I said, "Well, Peter, I don't know the song." I was making all the excuses that I've just summarised. And he said, "Look, I didn't ask you to be brilliant at German hymns. I asked you to lead. Get up and lead." And the call, right? And I said, "But what happens if I move my hands and they don't sing? I look like an idiot. You know, I'll do this and it's very quiet and I'm looking at myself and nobody's following." And he says, "Why is it about you? Why are you worried about yourself? I've asked you to step up and lead. It's not about you, George. Leaders, it's not about you, leaders. It's about the assignment that you've been given. Be faithful to it. Move those arms." So I start to move my arms, and it's beautiful music. The voices are just gorgeous, and I move it up, and they go up, I go down, they go down. I go quick, and it's there. Yeah, so, but you know, Peter was poking and saying, "Look, George, to be the leader in this assignment, you don't have to know how to play a musical instrument or sing a song. You don't have to have a voice. The giftedness is in the team. Your job is to unlock the talent that God has put in that team to bring them into that assignment, mission, purpose, so that they become a beautiful song in the world, salt and light." So our Sunday is really just a prep for us singing a beautiful song to the world on Monday. Okay.
And I guess just to take that conducting illustration, and I always thought it was that easy, mate, conducting up there. But to take that and apply it to the people who aren't conducting, I guess, you know, just as it's not the assignment's not about you, our ability to play our instrument well is not dependent on the conductor either, is it? I mean,
that's right.
We're compelled by the assignment. So everyone here in the church, God's calling us to pick up an instrument and do something. And very often I think we're paralysed by, I think that's a rare thing with these guys, but often I think people say, "Well, look, I'm not going to pick up an instrument because I'm not terribly impressed by the conductor." It's not really. There's a master conductor, isn't it? Yeah. And we are playing to that audience.
And the Spirit of God is there to equip us for the assignment He's given us, whether we're a follower or a leader or some other part of the fabric of the way He's changing the world.
Yeah, that's good. So George, just biblically speaking, mate, I mean, you've, this idea of fellowship. Can you just point us to some biblical examples of good followership in terms of the people who held the hand of God?
Yeah, like as a sort of a CEO 3 times now, and now into retirement phase with sort of non-CEO jobs, I look back and the guys that I get excited about in the scriptures, who I thought, yeah, that person, I know, that's what's going on in my life. So I go to Nehemiah, I go to Daniel, I go to Joseph. So these are Monday people. They've got big jobs working for a pharaoh or a king, or so the Persian king in Nehemiah. And they're busy. You know, the cupbearer to the king is like a 2IC, the chief operating officer. Character is why Nehemiah's there. He's trusted. And look at how he invests in doing the very best for his employer. And there's a very strong trust there. And even when he has a bad day, when his brother Hanani comes and tells him about the ruins in Jerusalem, and the walls are broken, the doors are burnt, and he's very sad, and you're not meant to show your sadness to the king, right, the boss. But it's a big issue for Nehemiah. I think he's earned the right to be real and authentic to his boss. And in that exchange, the king asks, "What's your problem?" And when he shares from his heart, the king can't but respect this loyal 2IC and says, well, what do you want? And Nehemiah's a good administrator. He's a good leader. He's already ready to tell the king what he wants. I suspect he was praying that God was going to answer his prayer, and sure enough, it was happening. And, well, a couple of certificates so I can get the timber out of your forests, that'd be cool. A couple of soldiers around me so I can go across the various provinces, and entry passports. And he's got all that worked out. He gives a summary. King says, go, but give me a date when you're going to be back. Gives him a date. And the whole story goes on, but he's just a wonderful leader. He turns up at night in Jerusalem and gets on his horse, and nobody knows he's out there. He's checking the walls out, doing his reconnaissance. And then he's working a plan to have each of the tribes do a part of the reconstruction work. So he's a good team leader. He knows how to put the talent in the right place. He doesn't collect a paycheck. He could have, but he doesn't do it because he wants to role model the appropriate service in the assignment. It's sacrificial. He spreads a table out to feed his leaders and his team in a sort of a generous hospitality. He doesn't charge a toll at the gate. He can. It's his gate. He's just fixed it. He's in charge, but he doesn't. He gets it all sorted out, this business guy. He goes over to Ezra, who's the priest, and says, it's all fixed now. You're in charge. You're the priest. And off he goes, back to the king, to get back to his Monday job. I really resonate with that story. And Daniel and Joseph. You just sort of see their prototypes, the way they're committed to God. They understand who the caller is. Their character reflects the integrity of the call, but they're loyal and invested in their assignment, and their bosses love them. You guys are special. What is it why are you so good at what you do? And obviously in some of those stories, certain things happen, and that story comes out, and the king gets freaked out in some places. It's really good.
That's very good, George. So we're in the obviously in the final stages of a campaign where we're asked to invest our resources in kingdom work, in kingdom initiatives, kingdom resources. As the chair of World Vision, mate, you've obviously come to understand a lot about stewardship and generosity. Can you share some of that as we prepare to be generous stewards of what God's given us?
Yeah. So the World Vision assignments are just a lovely assignment. They're working around 60 countries in the world. We've got about 45,000 staff. Directly impact 10 million children. If you go to the board meeting in the UK, was just last week, and if you were there with the international board has 24 board members. It's really crazy. But we'll open in prayer first, read the scriptures, pray for our big challenges in the world. Same here in Australia at the World Vision Australia board. Everyone on that board is very committed to Jesus, wanting to see the work. But we work in countries where we employ Muslims to do some of our work. It's an amazing sort of paradigm. We're seen to be the people of the book, the Old Testament, and so together we have a commonality around some of our heritage. But the kindness that gets generated and the response, I've met the wealthiest people in the world who are the people in the projects that have received the kindness. They are so grateful to have a life for their children, something they couldn't have had without the intervention of the work. So I keep saying I've met the richest woman in the world in a small island in Arlaw, who gave me the only thing she owned, which is a small pheasant egg, to say thank you as we went out there to visit on one of our trips. I wanted to give it back. I didn't want it, but the issue was that in giving it to me, she was no less wealthy. She was so grateful. So one of the treasures that you want to sort of keep in your journey around life in faith is don't lose the power of a grateful heart, where you're so rich through the grace of God. And everything else is sort of, it wears out, it rusts, you have to pay the maintenance on it, it leaks, it's sort of not the same thing, right? So I've got this thing about the economy of God, and in your sort of journey, as you sort of do your work here in terms of investing in growth and impact, remember in the Gospels, the 2 copper coins are worth more than all of the gold that was chucked into the offertory in that story that Jesus tells about the widow's mite. So in God's economy, it's not the the material value of the gift. It's the cost to the giver. That is the value that Jesus recognises. 2 copper coins are worth more than the gold coins. Doesn't work in New York or in the Australian stock market. Yeah, I know. We know in Philippians 4 that when you give, you receive much more. How? That's weird. That's not the normal economy that we know. But in God's economy, the response to a grateful giver is a greater response back. There was a guy called Latournier that wrote the book Mover of Men and Mountains. He built the biggest bulldozers in the world, Canadian guy. Old book now, but old speaker. And but he's got this, bulldozers are shovels, big shovels. And he said, I used to, he was a Christian capitalist, if you like, running this big business. But he said, I used to shovel it out to God for the programs that were in front of us in our church work, in our mission work, and God would shovel it back. It's just that God had a bigger shovel. Isn't that interesting, the way he paraphrases those sort of economic frameworks? The first, the last, the first. The powerful king comes as a helpless babe. The paradox of the economy of God. The boy's generosity, a small lunch of 2 fish and 5 loaves, feeds thousands because he was willing to give it to the disciples so that Jesus could share it with the hungry. The multiplying effect of a grateful, generous giver. And then a sort of another tilt, the Jews hated the Samaritans because they were sort of second-class religious people. In the eyes of the Jews, the Samaritans just didn't get it. Jesus dares to tell the story of the Good Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. No Samaritans are good, right? No, but in Jesus' paradigm, the Good Samaritan shows why he's good. He's not caught up with religion that sets him away from the world. No, he practices a graciousness and a compassion for a downtrodden individual, where that religion was the religion that Jesus was saying, be the salt and the light in the world. That's why I get excited about what we do at World Vision, by changing the lives of people. And through that kindness, bringing a hunger in the recipient that says, why is it that you are so kind to me? And letting the gospel grace story be known.
It's very helpful, mate. And just finally, George, for the last 14 years, you've been known as George Medibank Private Managing Director. And you, in some ways, mate, you're a bit of a Christian celebrity. We don't have many celebrities, so you're one of them.
I can't sing.
You can't sing, that's very true. And
jokes about
but what's impressed me, mate, is the way in the last few months you've gone from being George Savvides, Managing Director of Medibank, and for me, in many ways that must have been your identity. And just the ease with which you seem to have handled that transition. And yet, mate, I've been speaking to a number of guys through the men's ministry who are in a tough place, who are between jobs, and it's very natural for us as blokes to pin our identity to what we do. And you're no longer doing what you did, and there are blokes here who are between. Any counts, mate, how have you managed that transition?
That's a really great question, and it's certainly not one that I've totally landed. That's because it does hurt, right? It does muck you around when you've been on a 14-year sort of paradigm, and before that, other ones. But my identity is in Christ, right? It's not in the newspaper print. If you live on that stuff, you're going to come down in a smashing, crashing heap, right? It ain't going to help you when the Beatles had this old song, one thing you can't hide is when you're crippled inside. There's this, our wholeness isn't based on superficiality of popularity. It's based on the caller and the call. And if the caller has given me an assignment that starts here and finishes there, and there's another assignment which may not be as glamorous or even as popular or as transparent or visible, that doesn't matter. As long as I'm in the caller's space, then I've got my sense of identity. C.S. Lewis talks about, if only we would just get out of the way and let God do what he wants to do through us, then we would become our full potential. Yeah. So I've got to just keep reminding myself not to get addicted to the trappings of popularity, having some kind of profile. and remember that I was called into an assignment, and there may be some other assignments, there may be some gaps where I've just got to work out what to do in a gap, but not to let go of the hand of the caller. Yeah.
Mate, that's fantastic. Look, we're going to finish there, but very grateful, mate. It's been just really refreshing to hear your perspective on these things.
Well,
Thanks
it's been great to
for
be up
sharing
here,
from your
and I just
journey.
want to send my greetings from our church, New Peninsula Baptist Church in Mount Martha. It's in a part of the country where this morning it was probably 2 or 3 degrees, it's wet, where coffee is more than just a stimulant, it's actually a life support system.
Good on
Anyway,
you,
they
mate.
send their love and greetings to you. Thank you very much.
Let's thank George Savvides, everyone.